Okay, let's learn about the CSS Box Model and some of the things that we can do to shape and size and put separation between the elements that we have. So every element has content, and then the space around the content is where the padding is. And then after padding comes the border, and then finally the margin. Let's look at this in our web page where, remember that we had added to our paragraphs, we had added a border that was solid, 18 pixels big, and had a color. And if we look at that, we see the content. So here's the content, right? Those are the words inside the paragraph. Here in this case, the content is the image, right? So there's the image inside, and I clicked on it, so we got the link. Sorry about that. All right, back, sorry. So there's the image is the content. Notice that the content doesn't fill it up all the way because we put a specific width on it, and the image isn't quite that wide, so it doesn't fill it up all the way. But where there are words, it fills it up as best it can to the whole width of it. And notice now that the content, and then there's the border, we don't see any gap between the content and the border. And so what that means is by default then on these paragraphs, our padding is set to 0. So there's no padding there. But also we see that there's a gap outside the border before the next element. So a gap between elements, and that is the margin. So let's go back and look at what that looks like compared to this image. All right, so we see there, you see this idea on this paragraph. We have the content, which is the words, padding, which is set to 0 here, then the border, so we see the border over here, and then outside the border is margin, that's the spacing outside the border. So we can control the spacing on that entire box content, and every element has this feature that it's every HTML element. Here's another image that shows you about it, shows you that content, padding, border, margin. Here's one that shows you the details. You can control the top, right, bottom, and left of the padding, border, margin individually. So this shows you the details, how you can control them individually. And then to control the content, you can set height and width properties. Now, height and width properties only work on block elements. So you have to work with an element that is by default block, or you have to change the display to be a block element before the height and width work. So let's go ahead and look at how we can set these. So if we go into our code and let's play with our paragraph, and let's say, remember that padding was really short, so I can say, okay, I want the padding to be, let's do 24 pixels on the padding and see what happens. And there, notice that we got padding all the way around, and that's the space between the content and the border. And we were just able to pick how big we wanted it, and we did that on all the paragraphs. We get now this 24 pixel padding. Again, if we want to do more than one value here, so I can say, well, I want 24 pixels on the top and bottom, but I want 48 pixels on the left and right. I can do that with two properties. So the top and bottom are 24 pixels and the right and left are 48. Or I can do each one individually by putting 4. There's a couple of ways I can do them individually. So I can do it like this, or I can specifically say, instead of doing, so I can do padding top. And so if I take this out, I can just do padding top and say I just want a padding at the top, and I want it to be 36 pixels. So if I refresh, notice it didn't change anything except the padding top. So you have lots of control, and you can use the padding top, padding bottom, padding left, padding right, to get as much control as you want, right? And if you're only setting width, a shorthand way to do that is to just do with the padding. I can just say I want the padding to be that, and when I use two numbers, I get the the first one's top, bottom. The second one is left, right. Or I can set all four over here by going. And then it goes top, right, bottom, left. And we can set our padding that way. We have the same kind of control over the margin. Now remember, the margin is the space outside the border to the next element. All right, and these are actually, when you have two elements side by side, they share the margin. So we can check and we can say, okay, I want my margin. I can do the same thing with the details of margin left, margin right, bottom and top. So I can say I want the margin, and let's just set them all even and say I want there to be a little bit more space between them. So I'm going to do a 32 pixel margin on my paragraphs. And there, that opened up. Notice we got the margin on the left side, on the right, on the top and bottom. We'll have exactly the same on the right. And then there's just all this leftover page here that just isn't filled up. And so it's filled up with that background automatically. Okay, now notice that we're not playing with the padding of anything else. So here's a list item where we haven't played with any padding. Here's the table where we haven't played with any. All we did is on the paragraph. So let's go and do that, set some on the table. So let's go ahead in our TDs and say, wow, we want some padding here because just to give it up a little bit. And maybe not too much. Maybe let's just do 8 pixels and see what happens. And here I'm going to have it be the same on the top, right, left, and bottom. And there. So in the TDs, I set padding, actually in the TDs and THs, right, because I had them together in the same style block. So now I've added that padding. So margin here on the TD and THs, if I do this and say I want a 6 pixel margin, and reload. Notice I don't get anything here, and that's because I've set that border collapse property. So if I want to put margins, so space outside the border, I would have to get rid of that border collapse property. And then I can play with that margin there. Now notice when I do that, I have a gap now. I have that little bit of gap there, but this is not a controllable gap. So if I want that margin to be 16 pixels, I'm not getting that same kind of control there. So if I don't want, but I still have lots of flexibility with that padding inside a table. And I put that border collapse back again and have that be tight. So lots of control using padding and margin and border, so I can control all of those components of the box model on all of the elements.